Cheating on my husband to help my boss. Garden of Eden. Once upon a time. It was a beautiful sunny day. Birds were singing. Butterflies were fluttering. A stream gently murmured on the stones on the periphery. Beautiful flowering and fruit trees stood straight. Flowers abounded. In the morning, Eve wandered alone while Adam surveyed another part of the garden. A voice brought her out of her reverie. "Hello, beautiful. It's a beautiful morning. As always, isn't it?" hissed the serpent. "Oh, yes. It's very beautiful here. I like it here very much. I hope we never have to leave," she answered him. "Hey, have you ever tried this?" the serpent asked, holding out a beautiful apple to her. "No, we are not allowed to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge. God said we can eat the fruit of any other tree, but not this one," she said. "But not only is it delicious, but if you eat it, you will know as much as God. In fact, you'll practically become a god yourself. God isn't here now, and he'll never know. What harm can it do? Somewhere east of Omaha, 2022. It was a beautiful, sunny Saturday morning. Kenny Richardson had 2 more parts of his yard to finish. He was sweating in his t-shirt, but he was smiling broadly. He loved the look of his gorgeous, dark green lawn, especially after mowing it. Although he could well have afforded to buy a garden tractor, he liked the smooth surface the non-self-propelled mower provided much better. He grumbled when he saw an Apex courier truck pull up to his curb. His wife, Callie, had gone grocery shopping, which meant he'd have to interrupt his haircut long enough to sign for the package or envelope the courier had brought. He hated to stop mowing without finishing. "Man, that's some impressive grass you got there," the delivery guy said as Kenny approached him. "Yeah, all premium blue. None of that mix of shit everyone's pushing. I don't mind the rye part, but I hate thin-leaf fescue. Fescue is the damn cousin of creeping weed," Kenny said. "What have you got for me?" "Well, it's actually for your wife, but you can sign for it if you show me some ID," the delivery man said. Kenny pulled a driver's license out of his shorts pocket. The courier took a picture of it, thanked him, and handed Kenny an envelope. Kenny looked through it and took it into the house without opening it, then went back outside and finished mowing just as his wife pulled up to the house. "I'll drop off the packages. There's an envelope on the table for you that some fancy courier delivered a few minutes ago," Kenny said. Kenny took 4 steps from the car to the kitchen table, bringing the groceries into the house. As he put the last bag down, he found his wife of 35 years seated on the living room couch, sobbing quietly as she examined several pieces of paper. "Did someone die, baby?" Kenny asked. Callie looked up from the papers and tried to speak, but no sound came out of her mouth. Kenny hadn't seen that look on her face since she'd learned of her mother's death a few years ago. He sat down next to her on the couch, wrapped his arms around her body, and hugged her tightly. They sat like that for several minutes until Callie's tears finally subsided. "Ian Ross died yesterday," Callie whispered softly. Kenny knew his wife had been close to her former boss, but he was surprised by the extent of her grief. They had worked closely together for about 10 years, but hadn't seen each other since Kenny and Callie had moved to Charlotte, North Carolina from Phoenix, Arizona about 10 years ago. Kenny knew he probably wasn't the most sensitive person in the world, but this level of grief for a former employer seemed excessive. Kenny quickly recalled how Callie had worked for Ian. She had always thought of him as an impeccable gentleman and a wonderful mentor. He remembered that a couple years before their move, she had been worried about him after the death of his longtime wife, but he had apparently gotten over his grief and malaise by the time Kenny and his wife moved in, when Kenny had gotten a big promotion. "I need to get back to Phoenix for the funeral. It will be in 3 days, Callie said. "Do you need to go to the funeral?" Kenny asked. "Do I have to?" Callie looked straight into her husband's eyes. They had been together long enough for him to see real anger in them. "Yes, I need to go," she mumbled. "Well, then we need to go," Kenny said. "If he's that important to you, then it's our business." If Kenny expected his wife to be pleased with his declaration of support, he was mistaken. She continued to stare at him intently. "You don't need to come with me. I'm already a big girl. I have traveled alone before," she declared. "Even traveled alone to Phoenix to visit Joni." "I know it's not necessary for me to go with you. I just want to go with you," Kenny said. "Whatever you say," she muttered. "So you got notice of your old boss's death by courier the day after it happened? Isn't that a little unusual? Kenny asked. He didn't get an answer to that question. Phoenix, 2012. I'm really worried about Ian, Callie told the women gathered around the table at Mastriani's, an upscale Italian restaurant. It's been 3 months, and he's still worried about Anna's death. I realize grief has no timetable, but it's even starting to take its toll on the company. He's made some bad decisions lately that I don't think he would have made in the past. Callie was vice president of reinsurance at Phoenix General Insurance. Ian was the CEO of the company. Callie had been with the company for 22 years, gradually working her way up through the ranks. For the past few years, she had been Ian's go-to person in the reinsurance department. Maybe it's time you developed a more personal rapport with your boss, giggled Joni Caputo, Ian Ross's personal administrator. He's always had a thing for you. And it's not to say you've never noticed him looking up your skirt before. All 4 women at the table giggled like 15-year-olds. They all admired their boss, and they all had to admit that he was handsome and still in shape for his 60 years. So we nominate you for personal sacrifice for the collective good, Chandra Ferguson announced. Undo an extra button on your blouse, shorten your skirts and dresses a couple of inches, bend over a little more than usual, and maybe lean your big tits against his arm once in a while. Yes, and we'll cover you in front of the other employees to minimize suspicion, the 4th woman, Elvira Anderson, added. After all, this is an act of compassion, and we don't want anyone to get the wrong impression. All 4 clinked glasses and went back to eating. A week later, Callie took Ian out to lunch for the first time. Her blouse was unbuttoned 1 button more than usual, and she was wearing a white bra underneath. She was openly flirting with the man, and by the time lunch was over, she thought she saw a bit of the old Ian in him. He kept his eyes on my blouse for most of the lunch. At one point, he reached out and grasped my shoulder. Yeah, he'll be the old Ian again soon, Callie told the other women at lunch a few days later. I don't think it'll be more than a month at the earliest. Men are really very simple, Joni laughed. A glimmer of breasts, maybe a peek under the skirt, more exposure of the legs. Anything is better than a visit to the doctor for whatever is ailing them. All 4 women smiled and nodded. This time, Ian invited Kelly to lunch the following Tuesday. She was wearing a tight silk dark green dress, and as she left for lunch, 2 extra buttons at the top were undone and 2 more at the bottom. The dark green frilly bra was clearly visible, as was the top of her stockings when she bent over at just the right angle. Oh, you look hot, baby, Elvira said quietly, as Callie walked past her desk on her way to the elevator. Callie winked at her as she walked by, followed by Ian. Elvira smiled as Ian reached out and gently patted Callie's butt, following her into the elevator. She smiled back at him. The next week, Ian took Callie out to lunch once more, and then to dinner. Leaving for work the following Thursday, Callie carried an overnight bag and a bag of clothes to the car. Her husband always left for work before she did, and she knew she could stash the clothes in the trunk of her car until a more convenient time to bring them into the house. She thought about her husband for the first time, planning to help her boss through his grief and depression. Callie had no doubt that she treasures her husband, Kenny, very much. He is her soulmate, a wonderful husband and father. They met during their freshman year at Arizona State University and married a year after graduation. Kenny is a CPA and makes a good living. Together with him, Callie raises 2 children, goes on vacations, and plans to grow old together in due time. Callie knew that Kenny trusted her completely, and that would play a huge part in her plan to help Ian. Kenny wouldn't stick his nose where it didn't belong, and Callie knows she's smart enough to keep her relationship with Ian separate from her life with her husband. Ian knew Callie was married, which is why he had to invite her to a restaurant in a remote location. In his corner of the world, more than enough establishments catering to people of his income level and wanting privacy. They had a very nice dinner and had a wonderful conversation. Back on his game, Ian was handsome and charming, both chivalrous and slightly naughty, and Callie knew for a fact that her boss was leading her to his bedroom. She eagerly followed him. Ian looks as trim without clothes as he does in them, especially for a 60-year-old man, Callie thought. He seemed to really appreciate her choice of black corset and matching panties as he slowly and sensuously undressed her. Ian had warned Callie that he probably wouldn't last long the first time, as he and his late wife hadn't made love for a long time. But he had taken a small blue pill, so that would be enough for a couple of stints. Within 10 minutes, Callie was lying on top of Ian, resting her face against his shoulder and cooing in pleasure. That was delicious, Ian, she purred. I wouldn't mind spending a few more evenings here. How about someplace else? He asked gently. Maybe somewhere else if that can be arranged, she replied confidently. Callie showered and changed into the clothes she wore to work. She told her husband that she'd be working late and would be home by 9, and she was at least right about the time. For dinner, Kenny ordered pizza. The box with the few remaining slices was in the kitchen, and Kenny was sitting in the living room drinking his 4th beer of the evening when Callie walked in. She walked over to Kenny and gave him a quick kiss on the lips. Have you eaten? I left you a few slices, Kenny said. Ordered from Orzo's. Had the Greek salad, Callie replied. Yeah, thanks for brushing your teeth. You know how much I hate the taste of feta, he said. You're welcome, she replied, turning away and rolling her eyes. In addition to showering at Ian's, Callie brushed her teeth, even though she was sure there was no way her husband could taste anything. Callie went upstairs to change into comfortable house clothes. Once downstairs, she took her usual spot on the couch across from Kenny's folding chair. Sitting and watching some unnamed NBA game, she admitted to herself that she had enjoyed the evening with Ian immensely, and she didn't feel the least bit guilty. She didn't love her husband any less, and she hadn't taken anything away from him, she concluded. During the week, Ian and Callie alternated long lunches and dinners, changing the days of the week for each time. Each meal ended with lovemaking, once for lunch and twice for dinner. As far as Callie and her 3 accomplices could understand, no one else had any idea what was going on. Callie didn't often have to go on business trips, but when the need arose, Ian went with her, although she forgot to inform Kenny of that little detail. Hidden away from prying eyes for 5 days, the couple could by all accounts be husband and wife, and in fact, that was how they were registered at the hotel Ian had chosen. The trip actually lasted a couple days longer than necessary. Those 2 days were spent by Ian and Callie enjoying Miami and each other. Among the activities the couple did was a day on the boat naked and making love. At first, Callie resisted when Ian started to take off her swimsuit as there were other boats nearby, but Ian quickly changed her mind as he started kissing her, running his fingertips over her lips. While they were making love, 2 more boats passed by, making beeping noises in approval of their actions. Callie blushed and giggled when she opened her eyes to see Ian waving back at them as they continued to make love. I hope we don't run into those people at the restaurant tonight. I could die of embarrassment, she said. During the next 2 trips, Callie learned that Ian liked to make love in somewhat risque places. He took her into the fitting room of an expensive boutique in Boston, noting that he had done the same thing with his late wife a few years ago. The saleswoman winked at Callie as she made the purchase, and Callie wore the dress to dinner that evening, but left it with Ian at the end of the trip. She found Ian's gruff playfulness endearing, and her feelings for him continued to grow. Though she didn't want to admit it to herself, her mission of compassion was long over. You're not thinking of leaving Kenny, are you? Joni asked bluntly when the group of 4 women were having lunch a couple months later. It's pretty obvious that the boss has come back to his senses, but things seem to have gotten off between you 2. Callie hadn't really voiced the fact that her relationship with Ian had become anything more than compassionate. It seemed to her that if she didn't talk about it, she wasn't cheating. But even if she was, she still didn't feel that her actions were somehow affecting her marriage. Of course I'm not going to leave Kenny, she said seriously, as the other 3 women listened intently. But Ian, well, Callie had never called her relationship with Ian an affair, not with other women, not with herself. She'd called it a relationship all the time. She believed that an affair was nothing more than a vulgar love affair, and that what she had with Ian was something more, though not quite as much as the love she had for her husband. After a few months of her relationship with Ian, Callie never denied him anything. How long their relationship would have lasted is anyone's guess, but a little over a year into their relationship, circumstances took over when the principal in charge of Deloitte and Touche's Charlotte, North Carolina office had a heart attack, and those in power decided that Kenny Richardson deserved a promotion to the position. Kenny was pleased with the promotion, although the short notice created a bit of a problem for Callie and him. Callie could work out of her firm's Charlotte office, but she had to stick around for another month until life in the Richardsons' Phoenix office got better. Deloitte bought the Richardsons' house right away, but it took time to replace utilities, store furniture, and other normal hassles. Callie didn't really want to move, but she realized that Kenny's promotion was a major career move with serious implications for their paychecks and lives. She had no choice but to agree, especially since she could work in Charlotte as well. When Kenny left for Charlotte, Callie was able to make sure her last month with Ian was special, which she did by practically moving in with him. By the time Callie left for Charlotte, there was almost nothing left undone between her and Ian sexually. Boarding the plane, she stepped a little cautiously. She hoped her husband would be so happy to see her that he wouldn't notice if she didn't feel as cozy as usual for a few days. It didn't take Callie long to figure out that she could visit Ian once a year, telling her gullible husband that she was going to Phoenix to visit her best friend Joni for a week. Clueless Kenny, as Callie began to call him, readily agreed. Phoenix, 2022. Joni and her husband Stan picked Callie and Kenny up at the airport. Kenny noticed that Joni raised her eyebrows looking at his wife before they hugged. He didn't see the answering expression on his wife's face. Joni turned to Kenny and gave him a hug that seemed insincere to the man. Kenny and Stan exchanged handshakes. "Long time no see, bro. What's up?" Stan asked. Kenny gave an evasive answer. He'd met several of Callie's close friends and their husbands before he and Callie moved in together, and he'd always felt out of place when those couples got together. "What a good man you are," Joni said, "coming all this way to support your wife. You've met Ian how many? A few times. At Christmas parties and maybe a barbecue? That's what one does for a spouse, isn't it?" Kenny said, picking up on Joni's negative vibes. Joni and Stan took the couple to the restaurant, where they were joined by two more of Callie's friends with their husbands. Upon seeing Callie's husband, both Chandra and Elvira expressed surprise. Kenny even looked down to make sure his fly was buttoned or that he hadn't spilled something on his clothes earlier in the day. Over food and drinks, the conversation between the pair flowed fairly easily, though Kenny noticed he caught occasional silent glances from the women. When they were done eating, Joni and Stan drove Callie and Kenny to the hotel and told them they would pick them up the next day to take them to say goodbye to the body. Tomorrow at the funeral home, you'll probably remember some of the old gang, but it's been a while. I understand if you don't want to go tomorrow and just do your own thing, maybe rent clubs and play golf with some of your old friends, Callie said. "No, like I said, I came here for you," Kenny said, sighing irritably. Ian Ross had been a big man in Phoenix for years, with many business contacts and friends. There was a long line at the funeral home to say goodbye to the body. Kenny guessed that the three people in front of the casket, a man, a woman, and a child, were probably Ian's daughter with her husband and son. He had never met Ian's daughter, and doubted his wife knew her well either. She had never spoken of her at all in all her years at Phoenix General Insurance. Kenny was unsurprised when Ian's daughter burst out and threw herself into Callie's arms, noticing the woman as Callie's group approached the family. Both women hugged each other tightly and burrowed into each other's hair. "I didn't think you were coming," the woman cried into Callie's ear, and Kenny heard his wife whisper softly, "Shh, not now." The woman in her 40s recoiled from Callie, raising her eyebrows, then quickly lowered her eyes and coughed before looking up again. "Jackie, this is my husband, Kenny. He came with me to keep me company on my trip and to pay his respects to your father. They've met several times over the years I've worked in Phoenix." "Thank you for coming," the woman said hesitantly, then held out her hand and introduced her husband and son. Kenny shook her hand gently, trying not to squeeze it as hard as he usually did. He offered his condolences and shook hands with the man and the boy, while Callie and Jackie talked quietly for a few minutes. After the funeral, Jackie invited them along with the other three couples to her father's house for sandwiches and salads. I didn't realize you two were this close in the past, but from the way she greeted you, you know her well, Kenny said to his wife as they joined Joni and Stan back in the car. We'd met a few times over the years. Nothing else ever happened. She was a good kid, about 10 years older than the two of us, Callie said as she quickly turned away to the window to finish the conversation. After the funeral and burial, about 25 people gathered at Ian Ross's house eating sandwiches and helping themselves to refreshments. Callie and her 3 companions were in the kitchen setting out the food. Kenny, leaning against the doorway, was quietly sipping a Crown Royal when he heard Elvira ask if there was a tray of pickles and olives. The second cabinet to the right of the sink, Callie replied, laying out 2 kinds of bread for sandwiches. Kenny struggled not to choke on his Canadian whiskey as he turned and walked quietly out of the room, unnoticed by the women. He may be ignorant, but he certainly wasn't stupid. His wife could only know where the tray of pickles was kept for one reason. Suddenly feeling nauseous, Kenny staggered, practically staggering, out into the backyard of the house. That's where Stan found him 20 minutes later. "You all right, buddy? You don't look so good," Stan said, taking a sip of the beer he held in his hand. "Yeah, I'm fine," Kenny replied quietly. "By the way, I want to thank you for all the times you let Callie stay with you when she came to visit." Stan said, before he realized he'd been tampered with. "No problem. She's never been any trouble." "That's what she's good at," said Kenny with a wry smile. Suddenly, I wanted another drink. At some point after lunch, Jackie took Callie by the elbow and led her into her late father's study. Once alone, the younger woman hugged the older woman. "I'm so glad to see you, Callie. So glad you came," Jackie chirped. "Daddy would be so glad you came. I just didn't expect to see your husband with you. He doesn't know yet, does he?" "No, he doesn't," Callie replied. "I did everything I could to keep him home, but he insisted he had to come with me. Men, you have to love them because you can't kill them." Both women laughed heartily. "I know your husband will never understand this, but you helped Daddy a lot after Mom died. He was lost. And then you were so good together for so many years," Jackie said. "I realize you had to leave with Kenny, but Daddy missed you so much. He never had a steady woman after you left. He lived for the weeks you came home." "They were always wonderful weeks," Callie said sadly. No one noticed that Kenny was quiet on the way to the hotel, and then the next morning when Joni and Stan took Kenny and Callie to breakfast before their flight back to Charlotte. In fact, Callie just didn't notice that her husband had changed in any way until the plane was halfway home. "You're kind of quiet. Is everything okay?" she asked. "Not even close to okay, but I'm sure you don't want to find that out somewhere over Oklahoma, do you?" Charlotte, 2022. Callie blushed thickly and turned away from her husband as her brain began to cycle through her options for answers. She soon realized that the answers would have to wait until she got home. They got into their car before Callie tried to figure out exactly what her husband knew. "I don't know what Stan told you, but it's not true," Callie stated. "Stan didn't tell me anything." "You did," Kenny said. "Me? What are you talking about?" the woman exclaimed, showing genuine confusion and more than a hint of anger. "You and your friends were in Ross's kitchen, preparing a meal when someone asked where the tray of pickles was. And you didn't even hesitate. It's hardly a wild coincidence, baby," Kenny growled. "I may be ignorant, but I'm not stupid. So later, when I thanked Stan for putting up with you during your visits, he didn't know what I was talking about, even though he did a pretty good job of bluffing for you. So the only question is how long this affair lasted before we moved, and it turned into a weekly free pass for you for the last 10 years. Kenny was busy keeping his eyes on the road, so he didn't notice the sour expression on his wife's face. However, she was a smart woman and quickly joined the fray, so to speak. "It wasn't an affair, Kenny. I'd call it a relationship. It was compassion, baby. 3 months after his wife died, Ian got really sick, and I felt I had to do something to bring him back to the real world. Yes, I developed some feelings for him. He was a really great guy, but it wasn't love like you and me. Most of all, I tried to show him that he still had something to offer, and giving him hugs and intimacy and support," Callie said, What? Say that again, Kenny yelled. You didn't have an affair because you slept with him out of compassion? What was I born yesterday? If you feel sorry for the guy, buy him a damn escort or a golden retriever. By my count, you slept with him for over a year, and then went back and gave him a week of increased misery every year after we moved. By any other calculation than yours, you were a goddamn cheater. No, I didn't love him the way I love you, she screamed. You slept with him for over a year, and you only stopped because we moved, he said. What is that but cheating? And then you lied to me by spending a week in his bed every year as a married couple. You know where everything is in his house. I assume Joni, Chandra, and Elvira know about it, as well as their husbands, and probably Ian's daughter and her family, judging by the way that one greeted you when we arrived. I thought that was a bit much for someone who was just a crony. Compassion. You didn't have much compassion for me, your husband, when you slept with him, did you? No. It wasn't like that, she objected. He needed it so badly. He needed someone. He needed me, and I was there for him, proud to have helped him. Even in the darkness of the car, Kenny could feel the smugness oozing from his wife. He knew, just knew, that she thought she was so much smarter than her husband because she'd been able to keep her infidelity a secret for so long. Kenny only had to keep his secret for a week. On the second Monday, Callie received the divorce papers, and when she got home from work that evening, she was caught by the bailiff. Kenny, thanks for not serving me the papers at work, but we're not getting divorced over something that happened 10 years ago, Callie snorted. Oh, so you don't consider those one-week meetings over the last 10 years to be cheating? Kenny snickered. He's dead, Kenny, Callie said. You didn't know anything until a couple days ago. I didn't take anything away from you if you didn't even know about it. Kenny sighed. He'd had a whole week to think about it, and he'd mentally calculated what approach Callie would take. Let me save you some time, Cal. It was just love. He meant nothing to you. I need to let it go because it's all about my bruised and battered ego. Is that it? He said. Callie lowered her eyes to the floor. She hadn't expected Kenny to be so carefree, at least in words. She realized from the look in his eyes that he wasn't at all as carefree as he seemed. I'm sorry I hurt you. I didn't want you to find out, Callie said. He was dead inside, depressed, maybe even close to suicide. It was all to bring him out of his dire straits after his wife's death. We'd meet, we'd have lunch, we'd have dinner. The closer we got, the more he came out of his shell. Love became a natural extension of our friendship, our closeness to each other. It was love out of compassion, nothing more. A whole year of compassionate love sounds like an affair to me. Sneaking around for a week once a year sounds like a romance to me, Kenny said. It was a mistake, she shrieked. No, a mistake could be a one-time affair. What you had was an affair, a full-blown affair, he replied. If it wasn't an affair, then why did you keep going to him? Callie's mouth opened and closed twice, but no sound came out. She cleared her throat. Ian was a wonderful man. I believe I helped him. I loved spending time with him. It wasn't just love, she said. Wonderful men don't sleep with other men's wives, even if they're depressed. He knew you were married. He could have turned you down, Kenny said. How could you even think what you were doing was acceptable? You were a married woman. What you gave him, you took from me. The intimacy you gave him was mine. You promised me, only to me, all your intimacy when we were married. You lied to me and broke your vows, but you seem to have no remorse. What did I do to deserve such disrespect? It wasn't disrespect. I was helping him out of a difficult situation, Callie countered. Oh, yeah, right, Kenny spat out. You say virtue, and I say cheater. Callie recoiled as if she'd been slapped. While she hadn't expected to get caught, she certainly didn't think Kenny would turn on her so much. After all, they'd been married for 25 years. Such love surely must mean something, she thought. But apparently she was wrong. Callie quickly found herself an attorney, getting a judge to order the couple to undergo 12 mandatory marriage counseling sessions. She hoped the counselor's presence would make Kenny listen to her arguments about helping Ian. Sometimes hugs and companionship are just as important as love, Callie said at the beginning of the first session. After Ian's wife died, He needed someone's warmth, and I didn't see anyone who could help him. And that's when you decided it had to be you, that our marriage had to take a hit so Ian could heal. You traded our marriage for Ian, Kenny raged. No, it wasn't like that, Callie said. He was devastated. I was just being a good friend. You're my wife. Comforting a friend by spreading your legs is forbidden from my point of view. You should have refused to, as a good wife, he said. It wasn't part of my plan, but as our relationship progressed, it became part of it. I developed feelings for him. Not the same feelings I have for you, of course, but feelings of a sort. I'm not a cheater. I couldn't just sleep with him if I didn't care about him, she said. So you say you're not a cheater? And all the evidence says otherwise? Kenny snorted. Did the others know? How did you get assigned to be his healer? Kenny asked at the second counseling session. Callie lowered her eyes to the table, picking at her fingernail. We all talked about it nonstop, she explained. I was closest to him, so I guess it was my responsibility. The rest of us had to cover for me, so no one else knew what was going on. It was best for me, Ian, and the company. Just like that? Kenny said, shaking his head slowly. Even if it's bad for me. But then again, apparently I didn't count. Was I even fourth on that list? I love you. I always have. I love you as much as the day I married you, Callie said. This isn't about you. It's not about you, and it's not about me. It was about what Ian needed, and that was outside of our marriage. That's bullshit, and you know it, Kenny growled, rising from his chair at the table. You unilaterally stepped outside of our marriage, so of course you're trying to use that bullshit now. You put the other above our marriage. You didn't forsake all others, even though you made that vow to me. But I was saving him, she said hesitantly. So what about all those times you made love to him after you'd saved him? What about all those trips to Phoenix? Your relationship, as you call it, was nothing more than an excuse for you to be a cheater, he accused. I wasn't a cheater, Callie exclaimed. Why can't you see that? It wasn't about love. She was only a small part of the whole thing. But that all was wrong about love and everything else, Kenny said. You cheated on me for over a year. Over a decade, in fact. It's over between us, Cal. Kenny nodded to the counselor and left the room. Mrs. Richardson, regardless of your motives, pretty much fit the definition of emotional and sexual infidelity. And your husband has made it quite clear that he will never agree with your point of view. I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop these sessions, the counselor said. How could you just leave me like that after 25 years? Yelled at Callie's husband when he came home from work at the end of the day. Did our history, our love for each other, mean nothing to you? I could ask the same questions of you if I knew you were cheating on me with that bastard, Kenny shouted back. Does your love for me mean so little to you that you can cheat on me so easily? And don't say that it's not cheating. If you had any kind of intimate relationship with him, then it is cheating, which makes you a cheater. The couple's 2 children were unhappy with their parents. Both said they understood their father's point of view, but daughter Molly repeatedly tried to convince him to side with her mother. Until in one FaceTime conversation, Kenny asked his son-in-law if he agreed with his wife doing what Callie did. Molly and Daniel didn't really discuss Callie's cheating, figuring that the other would support their feelings. No way, Dad, the son-in-law declared. If my wife tries that shit with another man, she'll have her ass out of this house in a second. Daniel? Exclaimed a shocked Molly. What, Molly? He replied. Even before we were married, we discussed infidelity, emotional and otherwise. She cheated, Moll. End of story. And you're doing this crap. And every time you defend what she did to your father, I worry about us, Molly. No, Daniel, I would never, do that to you, Molly said. Yeah, and your father never thought your mother could do that to him either, Daniel said. The couple's son, Jerry, made no secret of the fact that he was upset with his mother. The first thing he did after Kenny told him about the divorce was to call his mother and cuss at her for several long minutes. Damn it, Mom. How could you do this to Daddy? And to us? You're destroying the family, Jerry said. It's not like your father said, Callie tried to argue. It's not just about love. I've helped someone. Whether you helped someone or not, you slept with someone other than Dad, didn't you? Jerry asked. Jerry noted to himself how loud the silence on the phone was getting. It lasted several seconds before he heard his mother disconnect. Kenny and Callie continued to live in their house together, but they slept in separate bedrooms, and the divorce was slowly moving forward. Callie and her attorney were questioning everything to slow down the process. She was sure that eventually her husband would see things from her point of view, or at least love her enough to see things from her point of view, and they would continue to live as a married couple. However, as time went on, Kenny began to talk to her less and less often, and it kept her down. Remember how we always talked about traveling the world and having adventures together as we got older? Callie asked one evening as they sat in the living room watching TV. Are you really going to give that up for a lonely life in a small apartment, sitting alone, just because of something that was 10 years ago and didn't affect your life in any way? If you hadn't found out about it through my obvious carelessness, we wouldn't be divorced and we'd still be planning our trips. Why can't you come down to earth so we can take the first option and grow old together? Why couldn't you have thought of that before having an affair? Why do I have to eat shit because you spread your legs? Kenny asked. A month later, Kenny got a call from Joni. He was surprised by it, but knew she was calling in an attempt to get him to reconsider his decision to divorce her best friend. She loves you, Kenny. You know she does, Joni said. Her relationship with Ian was to help him. He was so depressed. If he needed help so badly, why didn't you or Chandra or Elvira help him? Why Callie? He asked. Damn it. Why hadn't he gone to a therapist? The silence on the line told Kenny that Joni was trying to think of an acceptable answer. After a 10-second pause, she finally answered, She was the closest thing to him, personally. We all knew that. She stepped in and did what had to be done, Joni said. It was Kenny's turn to shut up as he thought about it. Tell me, Joni, would you trust Callie to be alone with Stan for a few days? He asked quietly. Of course I would. She's my best friend. She would never harass Stan, she replied confidently. You and she keep telling me that she loves me, but that hasn't stopped her from cheating on me, her husband. If she can cheat on me, why can't she cheat on you? Or anyone else? Again, it was Joni's turn to be silent. Damn it, she finally muttered. Thank you for listening. Charlotte, 2023. Kenny was amazed that Callie never seemed to realize the depth of her transgression in front of him. Even as she begged her husband to drop the divorce, she continued to insist that her act for Ian was a good thing and didn't affect her marriage to Kenny. If you hadn't found out, we'd still be married, would still be in the Garden of Eden, she remarked during their last meeting before their divorce. Phoenix, 2023. After the divorce, Callie returned to the company office. Living alone in an apartment, she didn't feel the need to spend money on a house. Once in a while, she would get together with 3 old girlfriends, but rarely received invitations to spend time with any of them at their home. Never again did she feel as connected to her friends as she had before the move, before the divorce. She still couldn't understand why Kenny didn't see her relationship with Ian as anything but cheating. I didn't take anything away from him. What could it hurt? She often asked her friends. The end,